Hey there, this is Natalie, and by the time this video goes up, Mushoku Tensei Season 1 will have finished. Yes, I know a lot of people call it Season 2, but it was actually Core 2 of Season 1. It was a split season, like we got with other things like ReZero Season 2. Over the 2 parts of the season, a lot of people discovered and fell in love with the series, and a few other people got angry about it. So now we're at the end, I think it's a good time to look at the subject of those angrier takes, main character Rudeus Greyrat, and how his character development went throughout the 23 episode run. This is going to be a long video because there are a lot of things to discuss, but I hope you'll find it interesting to look back on the whole season and Rudeus's story so far, while we wait for a Season 2 announcement. Incidentally, I will only be talking about what we've seen in Season 1 of the anime in this video, so it is spoiler free. But if you want to know more about what happens later in the series in the light novels, I have plenty of videos about Mushoku Tensei on my channel, as well as other anime content, and it would really help me out if you considered subscribing. And with the intro and obligatory begging you to subscribe out of the way, let's talk about Rudeus Greyrat. The inspiration for this video was actually someone commenting on my last video, which was analysing an interview with Mushoku Tensei's author, Reincarnation, to say that they didn't think Rudeus had actually changed all that much during the season, at least not enough for them to find him acceptable. This made me think, because to a lot of fans of the show, it seems like Rudeus has grown a lot since he was hit by Truck-kun and born into this new world. But if there are also people who think the changes in his character have been insignificant, then there has to be a reason for that too. Mushoku Tensei is 26 volumes long as a light novel series, and Season 1 covered only the first 6 volumes, so we're nowhere close to seeing all of Rudy's character development. This isn't the kind of series where the main character overcomes all of their flaws after the first couple of challenges, and then is a paragon hero for the rest of its run. But in Season 1 we see the first 13 years of his new life, as well as what kind of person he was before he was reincarnated, and so it is in this part of the story that he needs to be setting off on the right path and seeing some big growth. And I think the reason why some might think he's grown a lot, and others that he hasn't grown enough, are differences in understanding how his growth is being effected. What I mean by that is, naturally, the most controversial aspect of Rudeus is that at the start he is a degenerate, in terms of his attitudes towards sex and women. I talked a lot about this in the video about the author interview, so I won't go over my thoughts or the author's intention with it again, but it's certainly the element of the story that made its detractors dislike it. Because that's the thing the audience likes least about Rudeus, and because we want to like and care about Rudeus so we can enjoy the story more, some people may see his degeneracy as the priority for him to change, and therefore, if he's growing in other ways, it doesn't seem as important, and they won't feel any satisfaction in his development until he's provably stopped doing or thinking anything they might find uncomfortable. But the thing is, that's not the way his growth is being effected in the story. The tagline of Mushoku Tensei is not, "I will seriously respect women in my next life in another world." It's, "I will seriously try." He has a huge number of character flaws as a result of how he lived in his past life, but the ones that are most shameful to the audience around his degeneracy are the results of being on a downward spiral ever since he became a shut-in his teens. To him, that's just tangled into the mountain of regrets he has about how he lived, along with stuff like looking like a slob and never having had a job. It's not the special, irredeemable thing it is to the audience's sensibilities. It's evidence of why he should feel regret, but it's a thing that could have been prevented if it wasn't for what he sees as his biggest sin, which is never putting in any effort, never trying to get over his issues and work towards a better life, never applying himself and just hiding away instead. So when he gets an unexpected second chance to live, after hitting a true rock bottom, his resolve is to try in this life. This is the premise through which the author tries to develop his character, And it makes a lot more sense too, than a character like that being able to instantly understand why and how their attitude towards sex is a bit weird, and to base their entire second chance around not having those kinds of thoughts. Because his deviancy was a consequence of his lack of socialization and relationships, it can be addressed as a natural effect of him trying to be more active and functioning as a person in society. As Rudeus tries harder to be involved in things and be useful, he will automatically end up forming social connections, and through these, he begins to gain a better understanding of how to treat people to achieve the positive relationships he wants. He also starts to care about those people, instead of just seeing them as features of a game he's playing. By developing in all of these ways, he becomes a better person in ways he might not have identified as problems about himself before, let alone been able to change just through force of will. But all of that development can only come about because of that conscious decision to try harder. So when we're looking to see how and how much Rudeus develops as a character in Season 1, we really need to start by looking at all the ways he stuck to his personal vow to try in this life, and what he learned from the outcomes of doing it, and not at to what degree he's less likely to think something lewd about someone he shouldn't by the end of Volume 6 out of 26. The author is writing a journey of someone who is in need of redemption and is working hard to get it, not an exercise in turning an unpalatable character into a suitable hero for mainstream audiences to feel comfortable about rooting for. And so the early part of the story doesn't prioritise the same issues the audience might. It instead shows more how a person can change positively in ways they didn't even plan for, as soon as they take the first step of deciding to try to integrate into the world around them more. The first stage in this, which we see immediately after Rudy is reborn, simply is trying and working hard. In the first episodes, Rudeus realises that he's been granted this second life, and is determined that he will start on his mission to try hard in this world as soon as he can, despite being in the body of a baby. He pays attention to the things around him and tries to learn as much as he can of the language his family speaks and details of the world from them. And as soon as he's physically able to crawl, he's constantly on the move, always gathering information where he can. Once he's able to, he begins reading about magic and trying to learn how to perform spells himself. There are very few books in the house, and he had to essentially teach himself to read in a whole new language to be able to read those there are. But he's more than up to taking on these challenges because he's so strongly motivated not to slack off in this world. During this stage, which is just the first couple of episodes, social interactions and relationships aren't an important field of development for him, because he can't really think of his parents and Lilia the maid as his real family, so they seem more like NPCs in a game to him. They see him as a baby, and he has to play the game of not letting them catch on to his adult level of intelligence. They're the opponents he has to sneak around. They will love him and provide for him just as his parents had in his past life, and at the moment he just takes this for granted, because he still hasn't had the experiences that make him realise that family can have more value than that if you haven't fallen into an antisocial pattern of thinking about them. He doesn't really think about things like their privacy or how he looks at them, because they're not yet people he can feel he belongs with as a family. This will change, but it's understandable that it doesn't until he's old enough to be able to have proper communications with them, where he isn't trying to pass himself off as a toddler. Now, it could be said that the first efforts Rudeus makes in trying to work hard in this new world weren't that worthy of praise. Who wouldn't be interested in learning how to use magic under the circumstances, especially once it became clear they had a talent for it? If Rudeus finds the subject interesting, then his efforts don't really show that much of a departure from him learning all about computers by himself in his previous life, something that wasn't really shown in the anime, but which was an important interest to him. But given he could have been easily forgiven for putting off studying until later, once someone else had taken the initiative to do things like teach him to read, so it would have been easier for him, it does still show that he was being proactive, and that he didn't really allow himself to rest or wait at all. He'd train in magic until he'd exhausted his mana supply and would sometimes faint, and would devise his own training plans around those limits, so no amount of potential time he could have been practicing was lost. He perhaps even overcompensates for how lazy he had been before, because he can, because it's all he can do while the world still sees him as a small child, and because he feels like childhood this time around is all about preparing and equipping himself to have the most rewarding life possible. He had enough idle playtime in his adult life in the old world. Once it's recognised that he has been putting in the work to learn magic, his efforts are rewarded with greater encouragement and more opportunities to advance himself. Zenith, who specialised in healing magic in her adventuring days, is thrilled at her genius child and is determined to get him a teacher who can help him fulfil his potential, while Paul wants to see if Rudeus might show a similar level of talent and application in his own discipline of swordsmanship. It's at this point that his development goes from the things he can do by himself in isolation, just by his own willpower, to him starting to cooperate with other people and build relationships, as he gains Roxy and Paul as teachers. His relationship with Roxy is the first time someone from outside of the family interacts with him, and at first he's skeptical about her, and again sees her more as a kind of NPC who it might be fun to have around, than a person his actions will have a real effect on. We see his deviant side out in full force as he spies on her and steals her pantsu, seeing all of this as really just a game, where he can get some gratification as long as he doesn't get caught. As he begins to understand Roxy better and bond with her though, he develops an intense gratitude towards her for helping him face his fears about leaving the home and going out into the world again, as well as an admiration for her that becomes literal reverence. It's mostly played for humour that Rudeus cares so much about them, but even the stolen pantsus start to mean a lot more to him than just being an illicit thrill, becoming a reminder of the person he believes in more than anybody, the goddess who gave him the push he needed to make the next step in his journey of self-improvement, and to be able to go out into the world among other people without fear. Roxy leaves after getting Rudeus up to saint level in water magic because she herself has now been motivated to improve as a magician, Rudeus's successes making her question whether she's fulfilling her own potential right now. This is undoubtedly the first time Rudeus has ever had the effect of inspiring another person to do more, but she keeps in touch and is never far from Rudeus's thoughts throughout everything that comes after in Season 1. His development in terms of interpersonal relationships and bonds, however, continues with both Paul and his new friend Sylphy. With Paul, we can see that Rudeus at first judges him, as though the way Paul should be acting as a father is obvious to him. He feels like because he's older mentally, he has lessons he can teach Paul just by being his son. And sometimes he's right, such as in rebelling against Paul when he disciplines him for fighting with another boy, before listening to Rudeus's side of it, that he was defending Sylph from bullies. But Rudeus's ideas about how a father should be, and how people should interact in general, are all a bit warped, having mostly come from fiction and the standards of people in his old world. And so with more time and experience, he comes to see that Paul really is just doing his best at raising him, despite him being a very strange child, and that none of it is as easy as Rudeus initially imagined. This comes through in the development of their relationship, but only once they've been apart for a long time, so we really see the contrast in Rudy's perception of things. Perhaps the biggest contrast of all, though, is that Rudeus comes to actually think of Paul as his father, rather than a slightly wayward friend. With Sylphiette, who Rudeus at first thinks is a boy, we see quite a lot of ways Rudeus is characterised and developed. When they first meet, we see how he now has the confidence in his strength to act on his sympathy for people who are being bullied. He feels very strongly about bullying because it was that started his own downward slide, and now he has the ability to do something about it. He can also act on how he relates to the other things Sylph is going through, the isolation and loneliness she's feeling, because he now has the social skills and confidence to offer her friendship, as well as the strength to defend her. He seems to have learned that it's important in being a functional part of society to be able to offer something useful to other people, and he finds enjoyment in teaching Sylphy the magic he learned from Roxy, trying to follow Roxy's example due to his endless admiration for her. But he also gets his first important lesson in how to treat other people, particularly when things like privacy and potential romance are involved, during the incident when he tries to undress Sylph, thinking she's a boy, to take a bath. There are various levels to his mistake here, and Rudeus does learn from all of them. Trying to undress someone who is clearly shy about it would be wrong, even if it is in a context like boys showering together where nothing sexual is involved. Even if Sylph had been a boy, and assuming Rudeus isn't attracted to boys, there could have been all manner of reasons why he didn't want to show his body. But then, reacting as he did and explaining himself by blurting out that he thought Sylph had been a boy all this time would be quite insulting to her. The way he feels about it when things become awkward after this event shows him how much he did actually care about Sylphy as a friend, and how it hurts when he isn't sure how to make things right. And this teaches him a lot. With some honesty between them, they overcome this incident. However, the final thing Rudeus learns from this period of time with Sylphy is a lesson he doesn't appreciate until later on. When Paul notices that the two kids are becoming too dependent on each other, particularly because of Rudeus's insistence that he wants to go to Ranoa Magic University, but only if he can bring Sylphy with him, Paul decides to forcibly separate them. This is so that they can both learn to get by without each other and be in a better decision to decide if they actually want to be together after having more experience of the world. And both of them were codependent. In Paul's eyes, this was just because they were each other's first friends, and they hadn't seen much of the world outside yet. But what he didn't know was that that was still true for Rudy, despite him having 34 years of life in another world behind him. For someone who'd lived that long with no social life, with no friend to plan for a future with, let alone no love interest, the idea that he could always be with Sylphy seemed to be enough, more than he could ever have hoped for. But a social life where one person is expected to fill every role, well, while better than having nobody, isn't ideal, and so Paul took action to socialise both Rudeus and Sylphy more by splitting them up. At the end of this phase of his development, Rudeus has found someone to look up to and had someone look up to him, and all as a result of working hard to learn magic. He's started to genuinely care about people in this world, even if so far his scope has been quite small due to being in a small village. He's gotten over his fears about going out and interacting with strangers, and he's kept on developing his skills, up to the point where he was beginning to feel himself that there was nothing left he could learn where he was. He started looking to the future, wanting to go to the Magic University and follow in Roxy's footsteps, bringing Sylphy with him. This has been a very productive period in the rehabilitation of the neat shut-in, even if he does still have his questionable pervy tendencies, as we see in some of his early interactions with Eris. But why does he still have these tendencies? He has learned from the incident with Sylphy that these kinds of actions can negatively affect the people he cares about, and he has to come to respect the people around them and see them as real people, rather than part of some game sandbox he's in for his own amusement. Well, probably because, really, the social bonds he's built have shown him that he could be someone who could form romantic relationships, but he's now unable to because he's still in the body of a child who shouldn't yet really have the drive for that sort of thing. Only a frustrated virgin would put that much weight in things like getting a glimpse of some panties, and we know now that Rudeus still very much sees himself as a frustrated virgin, growing more frustrated by the fact he has to wait even now he's becoming someone who isn't repulsive to potential partners. He has gained some wisdom about how he wants to treat girls, but he's still weak when it comes to actually resisting behaving in a creepy way. He only manages to master his self-restraint later while he's travelling with Eris, and doesn't take the opportunity to grope her when she's seasick and he's tending to her with healing magic. but they do have feelings for each other at this point, and Rudeus has come to respect that he's promised to wait until they're older, and that going back on that promise would be a mistake. He still experiences the desire, but he recognises it as something he must not act on. And that's really the state he remains in, until Eris decides she wants to act on the promise they made prematurely, when she's turned 15 rather than when he has. Yes, he has not become a perfect angel who could live like a monk, and he doesn't beat himself up over his pervier thoughts every time, but he has developed into someone who Eris can trust to be around her when she's at her most vulnerable, which would demonstrably not have been the case earlier in the story. Of course, she's changed a lot too, which is something I talked about in the video about Rudeus and Eris's relationship, so I won't go into that too much here. Rudeus learns many other lessons as he works as Eris's tutor. He learns a lot about what it takes to get someone who isn't automatically going to like you on your side, and that it can be worth the effort. He learns how to be a leader, something that will serve him well after the mass teleportation incident. He begins to see the joy in making other people happy and helping them to achieve things, such as in helping Eris get through her birthday party without embarrassing herself. He also makes some big mistakes, such as trusting that his plan to stage a kidnapping would be foolproof, which revealed to him how little he really knew about the society in this world, and that he wasn't always the smartest schemer in the room just because he'd lived in a more advanced, yet more peaceful society. He witnessed true violence, brutality, and killing, and had to accept it as part of life here. He also learned about himself that he didn't want to become caught up in the politics of the nobles, and that this would not be a path he would choose. While a lot of time here is spent teaching, he also keeps up his efforts to work hard on his own repertoire of skills, learning other languages and practicing his earth magic by making highly detailed figurines using it. There is a point to reflect on how far he's come at his 10th birthday, which is a big deal in this world, and he's warmly celebrated by the people around him, including Eris's mother Hilda, who'd been resistant to showing him any affection before. Eris presents him with an amazing and expensive gift in the form of his staff, and he navigates a setup in which Philip, Eris's father, tries to bring him into the family for political reasons by sending Eris to his room, which ends up with no real harm being done to his relationships with Eris or the family after he accepts Eris getting cold feet and his own reluctance to be involved in politics. But it's just after this point that the first turning point of the series hits, and Rudeus will be forced to put a lot of what he's learned into practice after being teleported with Eris to the dangerous demon continent, and now suddenly having a mysterious god giving him advice. If the series up to now had allowed Rudeus to grow, change and develop in a natural way, at a natural pace, and on his own terms to a large extent, then the events of the mass teleportation incident are more like someone being forced to rapidly improve under extreme pressure. He's no longer working hard just because he wants to be better. He's working hard because failure now means that he and Eris, who he wants to protect, can be in fatal danger. He has to not only lead people, but lead a party that includes a highly feared Spurd, who is centuries older and leagues stronger than him, but who he somehow still has to be able to rein in at times. He has to make money in dangerous circumstances, deal with monsters and human adversaries, and plan and execute long, difficult journeys, and all to keep his promise to bring Eris home. He gets a skill power-up in the form of his demon eye, but he also broadens his experience and network of people he knows immeasurably, which will pay off even more in his future challenges. He certainly applies an open mind as he travels, perhaps his modern sensibilities actually being useful for once, in allowing him to ignore in-world prejudices against different races and make allies with and learn more about people, including demon and beast races, communicating in their own languages and discovering more about their histories and worldviews. He spends time in Roxy's hometown and Ghislaine's, coming to know more about these people he respects and the cultures they come from. And yet, he doesn't let their family's memories of them from long ago change his own opinions about them, and advocates for what admirable people they've become. Probably because it's not only easier for him to believe people can change and become better than it would be for most people, but because he needs to believe it. His reunion with Paul is another point where his development is at the forefront, but I have a whole video going into the relationship between Paul and Rudeus and how both characters see each other at that point in the story, so I'm not going to retread all of that here, especially given how long this video is already getting. Nonetheless, the way he now views his family as his real family, feeling regret at how he treated Paul, and not knowing his family were also affected by the teleportation incident, or that Zenith, Lilia and Aisha were still missing, and even at damaging his relationship with Norn, who he really does see as his little sister, despite not having seen her since she was a newborn, makes his development into someone truly invested in this new life very clear. He's more than willing to face danger to help these people, and feels intense regret when he hurts them. This is a stark contrast to the numb feelings he had towards his family in his past life, when his parents died and he couldn't even muster the energy it would have taken for him, a long-term shut-in, to attend their funeral. So now he sets off with another goal in mind. As well as getting Eris back to where they came from, even though he has to break it to her that there probably won't be anything left there of the life and family she remembers, he also wants to find and save the rest of his family. This would have been a very difficult process, but thanks to the jerk god Hitagami telling them where Lilia and Aisha are, and somewhat cryptically advising him on the steps to take to rescue them, he manages to pull it off fairly easily. One thing that was skipped from the light novels here is that when he first saves Aisha, he's surprised that he's not interested in her panties. Yes, it is weird to be surprised by that, of course. Rudeus is still a weird person, but the fact he doesn't have any lewd thoughts where his little sister is concerned should be good news for those people who will only accept improvements in his level of degeneracy as character development. It's also here that Rudeus meets Pax, who is definitely the exact kind of creep Rudy might have become in this world had he not learned any of the lessons he did and had just lived his life as an entitled, somewhat talented rich kid with pervy tendencies. While it's hard to imagine here, Pax himself doesn't actually go without a redemption of sorts in the story, but for now he serves not only as an adversary, but as something for Rudeus to reflect on. He's rescued by Zenobia due to a coincidence involving his Roxy figurine, but this is more to introduce Zenobia as a character than to Deus Ex Machina Rudy out of the situation. He would have been safe eventually once Ruijerd and Eris showed up, and he knew Pax's plan was idiotic, and so Lilia and Roxy, the targets of his scheme, were in no actual danger. What Rudeus does learn here, actually for the second of 3 times in the season, is about a type of magic that so far he has no way to deal with. The first was the Beastmen's paralysing vocal magic. The second one, this one, being the barrier magic Pax used to trap him, and the third being Alsted's skill of nullifying magic. In each case, Rudeus notes that these special types of magic could be a problem for him in the future, and he resolves to learn what he can to both be able to use them himself and to counter them, remaining motivated not to rest on his laurels when it comes to working on his skills. And then we get to turning point 2. This is a point where Rudeus is really forced to reflect on what he's achieved so far, thinking that he's been killed, and that this will be the end of his second chance. One of his biggest regrets is, yes, that even after all of this, he's still going to die a virgin, even with the promise in place that he and Eris would consummate their relationship when they were both adults by the standards of the setting. He hadn't managed to live that long, or so he thought. This does show the kind of backslides Rudeus sometimes has, where despite everything he's achieved, his priorities still remain sexually focused. But I don't think it would be fair to say that that's his only regret. He basically feels like he tried so hard and he got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. His prodigious magic skills he dedicated himself to improving, the friendships and family bonds he'd found, and all of the challenges he'd gotten through were useless if he died here. And yet, Orsted was unfathomably strong, unfairly strong as an adversary for him as he is right now. The point where he thinks he's dead is really a good summation of how he feels about his own development towards the end of this arc. He's doing better, but it's not enough yet. He needs more time. He just doesn't realise he's actually going to get it. Not dying here reaffirms his motivation to keep trying hard and being proactive about things, and also removes him of any innocence he might have had regarding just how dangerous this world could be, even with the skills he'd acquired and with Ruijerd as an ally. And now Ruijerd leaves, forcing Rudeus to accept that this journey and this phase of his life is over now, and that while their friendship will remain, the times of travelling the world as dead end will never come again. It hasn't all been easy or comfortable, but all three members of the party know that the 3-year journey they shared has changed them forever, in ways they'll always value. This may seem inevitable for Eris and Rudeus, who'd been on their own coming-of-age type arcs here, but even for Ruijerd, who's over 500 years old, the experience of being in this party has been an important learning one. And so, of course, we get to the final major event in Rudeus' story for this season, his night with Eris, and the consequent depression brought on by her leaving. The impact this has on Rudeus is something I think I went over enough in my video about Rudeus and Eris' relationship, which I'll link to in the end card. And so I'm really just going to summarise it here in terms of his development, but what we see is that Rudeus' low self-esteem, carried over from his past life, causes him to assume there can only be bad reasons why Eris is gone, and to once again begin to see his efforts in life as futile. It seems like he could easily regress into the same negative patterns of self-isolation and misery as he did when he first became a shut-in. And seeing how a setback like this makes him feel like maybe things aren't even so different in this life does make us wonder if the changes in him were just on the surface level. If he's still so paralysed by his inner demons that his progress is only possible when things are going well and his hard work is being rewarded, rather than, to his mind, rejected. But after a bit of wallowing in his misery, Rudeus does accept that he has to keep going. He will continue to feel depressed and hopeless, but for the sake of other people, at least for now, he sets off to try and find Zenith. We see that in the past, his mother had tried to be supportive, but he hadn't responded to it. And he sees that maybe if he had, things wouldn't have got so bad. He remembers that Zenith loved him, and that even if he's hurt and taking no joy in anything right now, there's still something he can do that's worth doing, and that doing it, even while he feels this way, and while he's alone, is really the essence of keeping his promise to try harder. Doing something when it isn't fun, when it isn't even making him feel anything, rather than letting himself get pulled under again. And this is where we leave Rudeus for this season. Personally, I think there's definitely enough character development there to make sense for the character and for the period of the story we've seen. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, though as this is a spoiler-free video, please put a spoiler warning and some blank space before a spoiler, so people have to expand the comment to read it if you want to discuss stuff from later in the series. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon who are on screen right now, and to everyone who supports my channel by subscribing and watching my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.